Welcome to the Buddhistisches Tor Berlin podcast. Here we share talks and reflections from our Buddhist Centre in Berlin, exploring themes such as meditation, ethics, and the path of awakening in everyday life. We are part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and our talks are offered freely in a spirit of generosity. We hope this episode supports your practice and your life.
So I was talking to Dharma yesterday about a theme to share. And I think when you travel, as I have done coming here for the first time, you're really taking in the whole experience of what it is to be in another country. I've been to Germany before, but not to this part of Germany. And you're just taking in all the sights and sounds, and this is different and that's different, and this is similar and that's similar. And of course, it's a special occasion as well, the bank holiday and all the events. So I felt suddenly steeped in a lot of history, because there's a whole history to those events. But I also felt steeped in people gathering, coming together, connecting in different ways. And also the sun was out, so all the kind of joy and the ease somehow of that. And so I think, we were talking about what theme, and it was like, well, this is the human life, isn't it? The sort of the struggle of the past, and the desire for progress in a certain way, as was demonstrated in the events yesterday, but also just the need and the desire to be with others and to be seen and to connect and to reflect, have space. All of that I thought was all that was there yesterday. So being human is the theme that I'm going to be sharing. And I was thinking, as I was sitting there meditating today, I was thinking, gosh, I'm in Berlin about to give a talk. If you'd have said that to me years ago, I'd have been like, me, doing something like that. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't have crossed my mind really. And I thought, I've really become a Buddhist consciously by accident, complete accident, and yet unconsciously looking back, almost by design. So really interesting juxtaposition there. I say completely by accident because when I got involved, 30 plus years ago, I didn't know any Buddhists. Buddhism wasn't talked about at all. Meditation wasn't really a thing in my circles. The only person who I knew meditated was my cousin. I shouldn't do that. Meditated. I shouldn't do that. It's my cousin in the Caribbean who's Rastafarian. So he'd go up in the hills with his, smoke, and he'd be meditating. And it was, for him, he was meditating. He was reflecting. And then he'd come back down to the village and then share all his wisdom, So he was the only person I knew who had any kind of contemplative practice. But it was mixed up with a few other things, So with him particularly, that's his personality. I was like, So I had to sort of he was wise, but you also had to kind of look out. Not sure what he was always doing, So that's the only person I knew. Otherwise, you would say that meditation was a fringe activity, something that you'd have to be pretty far out to do. Even being a vegetarian in those days was far out, I guess it's the equivalent these days of living off grid, with no electricity. To me, it was that kind of thing. And if you'd have asked me at the time, am I going to meditate? Am I going to be a Buddhist? I'd have been like, why would I do that? I've got lots of things I want to do in my life. The world needs change. And I need to change myself as well, but really I've got to make a difference in the world. That was a real strong urge for me. And the other strong urge, I guess, was I've got to just sort my life out. I've got to get work, have a house. I've just got to do all those things and try to do them well. So those are the things that were in my mind. How do I do, I guess you say, ordinary life well? And then how do I make a difference? So that was in my mind. And really, I tell this story a lot because it was my sort of catalyst story, because I was locked into those two kind of themes. Personal happiness, you could say, and change, societal change. But the thing that happened to me was that and I don't know, I was thinking about this when I was sitting there today. If this wouldn't have happened, would I still have started meditating or becoming a Buddhist? And I think maybe I would have done. I probably would have done. But it might have just taken me longer. It might have taken me longer. It might have taken a few more incidents, a few more events, a few more challenges for me to get myself out of this binary, this or that, or this and that. So really, I was on a plane. I was traveling back from Philippines, where I'd been visiting a friend. It'd been a difficult trip, actually, so I was really relieved to be coming back to the UK. It's an 18-hour flight, and somewhere in the middle of the flight, the plane went into difficulty. And you knew that because you could obviously feel we were dropping lots of feet. And then the staff started really, getting anxious. They looked anxious to me. They were shouting at us, to keep quiet, because people started crying. People started, they had lots of these, on board. It was a very Catholic country, the Philippines, so people were praying, children were crying. It started a little bit, and then it became practically the whole plane. And I just was like, first it's physically very uncomfortable, you're being, in that kind of situation. But I was just like, oh my God, I'm too young to have this experience. I'm too young to die, for one. And also I was looking around at everybody thinking, well, because I was freaking out. I could feel it. I wasn't, shouting. I wasn't doing all of that. But internally, that's what was going on. I could see my hands were on the armrest, and they were just like, clenching like this. And I could barely breathe. And I just thought, looking around for someone to help me. But everyone was in their own drama. Everyone was in their own panic. And I was like, and I realized then I didn't have any resources, internal resources to deal with that situation. I did think, well, this is the moment to call on God. But I'd given up God. So I was like, shall I call on him anyway? What should I do? Maybe it's okay. But I didn't. I kind of thought, no, I won't do that now. And it just struck me that I didn't have another response. So anyway, the thing that happened was I was just in this. And then suddenly I turned to the window, and there was this incredible scene. It was I call it like a mystical sky, because I was met with a sky that I'd never seen before, never seen since. It had all the colours almost of the rainbow, purples and oranges and gold, and then there was this blues and indigos, and there was this expanse of black as well, and a huge star. And I just gazed at this scene. I don't even know for how long I was looking at it. All I know was that the plane experience disappeared from my consciousness. And I was almost like with that. And eventually I turned back to the plane. It was all still happening. The drama was still unfolding. shouting, crying, prayers. But I noticed that my being I was in a completely different state of awareness, state of consciousness. I was relaxed. I could feel my breath. My hands were no longer gripping the armrest. And I just was in this kind of state of clarity. I say state of clarity as in there was nothing much in my mind. I wasn't thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? I just wasn't thinking of the past. I wasn't thinking of the future. I was just here with the experience of being. And out of this space emerged a couple of questions. And these questions are still the questions that are guiding my life. And the first question was, how do I live so that when I die, I can die without regret? And the second question was, how do I love? And those questions emerged, and I promised myself that if the plane landed, I would go in answer of those questions. I thought I know someone's worked it out. I can't be the only one to have thought these questions. Someone has already got the answer. That's me being efficient, right? Because I also did think, if I have to literally find it out from scratch, it's going to take forever. And I knew this, just having the experience of the plane, I thought, I don't know how life's going to pan out. I don't know how long I got. So if this plane lands, I'm going to go and find the answer I'm going to find someone who's already worked some of this out. So that was the beginning of my search, really, my conscious search. Before that, I'd been doing quite a bit of personal development, I would say, like journal writing and trying to just figure out my past and my family dynamics, all those. I'd been doing that kind of work, like just psychological work, and usually when, difficult things happened, I was like, oh, why am I feeling upset? And then trying to kind of work it out. So I'd been doing that, but this was a different kind of search now. One of my criteria, I think, was I'm going to go in search. I need to be completely open to what I find, but I'm not going to do anything that's weird. I'm not going to do anything that's going to take me away from normal life. I really didn't want that. It was really strong, actually, that, and so I started going to bookshops and seeing all the books, the spiritual books. Because I was familiar with Christianity, so I knew that. But then I was looking for something else, something that I guess talked about the mind. It talked about fear, talked about what fulfillment is. There were other questions I had. So I'd go to the spiritual books, and there'd be all kinds of books that I just don't relate. There'd be people in white looking up like, and I just thought, no, that's not it. So I really didn't know where to look. And it was the days of we didn't have the internet. Obviously now with the internet, I could have typed in all kinds of things and would have got a plethora. I would have got so many different responses to what I would have typed in, But I was in the days where you had to literally go and find somebody or find a book to get the answer. So it was by chance, and this is why I say it was accidental, because I just happened to be in my local library, on top. I was standing at the top of these really long stairway, and I was talking to a friend and saying to a friend, I feel like I can't quite do life in the way I did before, because I've got these questions. And I was trying to explain to her all my experience that I'd come back with. And she was just a bit like looking at me going, oh, well, never mind, just get on with it. And I just thought, I can't quite. I can and I can't. So I was frustrated, actually, with the communication I was having. She was really trying to help, but we weren't meeting each other. And anyway, we were in this middle of this thing, and I then was looking at the stairway, because it was a really busy stairway, lots of people walking up and down. And I just saw this guy walking up the stairs, and he was walking so slowly, like he was going nowhere. And I thought, and it was so different to everybody else, because people were chatting to each other and running up the stairs, and he was just like... and I thought, what's he doing? You know, then I would chat to my friend, and I'd look again, and he was still walking, and chat to her, what's he doing? And then finally, he made his way to the top of the stairs, came to where I was standing, and there was a table there, and he put some leaflets on the table. And I watched him walk back down the stairs the same way, just like... And I then looked at the leaflets, and it said, Creative Communication Workshop, Bristol Buddhist Centre. So I just ignored the Buddhist bit, and I thought, creative communication, that's what I need. I need to know how to communicate my experience, so at least I can then get some answers. So I went along to it, and it was a house. You knocked at the door, and I was really nervous. I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to find behind this door. You know, they're probably going to have, you know, long beards and sandals and, you know. I knocked at the door and, yep, long beard, sandals, you know. It's like, okay, I wasn't wrong. But very friendly. Came in, started the mindfulness of breathing, which is what we've done today. I couldn't do the practice. At least my mind was everywhere. And I was just so interested that, gosh, it's so simple, this practice, and I can't really do it. So what's going on? Anyway, I had many other experiences beyond that. I did walk away from that day with two books. One was called Healing into Life and Death, which was written by a man who worked in a hospice. And he was talking about, you know, meeting people when they're really engaging with people when they're their final times, their final days, and all that emerges. He talked about the people who are just open to the experience, and even if their body's in pain, they're loved. They are able to love, they're able to be with their experience, they're sharing their experience. It was very beautiful. But he also talked about those who are angry and struggling and pushing others away. And the whole book was around, well, how do you live so that when those moments come, you can be fully with it, you know, and not go with regret. So it really was pointed to the question I had. And then the other one was a Buddhist book, a bit written by Sangharakshita, who founded Triratna, this movement. And he was just saying, this is really super helpful for me, because he said, actually, everybody has experiences whereby if you like, the level of consciousness raises from the ordinary to something, you know, extraordinary or something out of the ordinary. You can have that in nature. You can have that listening to a piece of music. You can have that, you know, if a child's born and you're holding a baby for the first time. Any pivotal experience you have can take you out of the ordinary, out of the everyday. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and I've got this is next, the past, present, you know, past, future. Takes you out of that, and suddenly you're stepping back from life, looking at it from a different perspective, a different vantage point, and you're asking yourself much more profound questions than you normally do. He said that is a lot of people's experience. However, and this is what was really helpful for me, he said, really in a way, the Buddhist path is having those experiences, that vision, if you like, having a vision, and then not just allowing it to fade, not just going, oh, well, that was interesting, wasn't it, and going back to every day. Is like developing, cultivating the rest of your life, your work, your communication, your relationships, the way you are yourself, so that it meets that vision. In a way, the vision, you have that visionary experience, And then that visionary experience informs the rest of your life, so that the rest of your life eventually becomes one with that vision. Does that make sense? Yeah. I thought, that's it. That's it. Because I knew myself, and I knew that I'd had this big experience, and I also knew that I had to sort my life out. And I also thought I could get very busy and submerged just in that, because it's quite compelling. You know, work and success, and just it takes a lot of energy. So I thought I could just put myself fully in that, but I wouldn't be answering these bigger questions, and I wouldn't see what does it look like to love in all the different areas of my life, not just with a partner or my family or close friends. What does love look like at work? What does love look like, with my neighbours? What does it look like in my relationship with myself? How I am just walking down the street? That's a bigger question. So, okay, that was me really kind of thinking, okay, the Buddhist path, I'm gonna try it. I went on my first retreat, and really the rest is history. But I say, I'm Buddhist by accident, and I've explained why it just was a chance event that took me there. But also by design in a sense as well, because when I did discover the Buddha, even though, his story, and even though the story of the Buddha is, he lived 2,500 years ago, he was Asian, he was a man, he was rich, he had his life set out. It's very different to me, basically. I was like, okay, that's not my life. That was not the life I grew up in. I grew up in the East London, very poor family, different culture, just everything. Every level was different. And yet, his story, when I heard his story, I thought, oh my God, I totally relate to his story. And I think the relationship to the Buddha's story obviously evolved over time. But the immediate impression was, I can learn from this. It's almost like a map. Well, for me, it was like a map like a template almost, that I could then put my own life on. That's kind of how I saw it. How many of you know the Buddha's story well? Okay, a few of you, but I'll share my version of it, which is, he's living in a palace with his father, his wife, his child. He knows what he's going to do for his life. He's just going to follow in his father's footsteps. His father's a great ruler. He has everything he needs, basically. Apparently, if it was cold, they'd go to one palace that kept you warm, and if it was, warm, they'd go to, they had different palaces for different weathers. That's kind of, so designing your life so that every bit of it works. That's how I thought of him. So he's living this life, everything's fine, until really one day, he just looks around at the whole scene of his life, and he just asks himself, is this it then? Should I just be doing this? It's a very simple question, isn't it? It's a very simple question, but it's actually a very profound one. And I've had moments in my life. I had a moment in my life, and I was a practicing Buddhist. So this is me practicing, but I had a moment in my life where I went on holiday, came back. I'd spent a lot of time looking at the blue sky on holiday and being in the sea, so I came back very open. And when I came back, before I opened my front door, I was getting nervous. I was like, oh God. Still call on God, obviously, every now and again. But anyway, I was like, oh. And I thought, why am I nervous? What's going on? And I just remembered, because I'd had this wonderful experience, just very spacious and calm. And I just opened the front door and looked at my, like my house, and I thought, I don't know if I want to step over this threshold. Because me stepping over this threshold is me stepping back into the life I left before holiday. And that was not a life I want to live right now. It was too busy. I had too many demands. I had, various things going on. And I thought, oof, that's another moment of, is this it? Is this the life I want? So the Buddha has that experience. He's not called the Buddha, he's called Siddhartha. Siddhartha, that was his name. He has that experience. And he basically decides to go out to the palace and just look, have a good look around. And as I was saying, you never know what's going to happen. Anything can happen at any time. And you've experienced me having a little medical throat emergency there. And it was actually the thing around, how do I live so that when I die, I can die without regret? And I said, it's still with me as a question. And the Buddha, in a way, that's what happened with him. He basically went out the palace, and the story is that he'd never seen these things before. The reality is that he probably had seen them, but hadn't taken them in. They hadn't penetrated his consciousness as connected to him. So he saw an old person for the first time, it says. And he looked at that old person with his attendant and said to his attendant, it's kind of, your old person, not your vigorous old person who's just run a marathon, but like the old person who's bent over and struggling. And he says, what's up with them? And he says, oh, they're old. You might be old one day too. If you live long, you'll be like that. And the Buddha's full of youth and vitality and health. And he really sees it as his destiny. He doesn't go, I don't think that's going to happen to me. I'm not going to be that kind of old person. He really sees it as, yes, he sees the truth in it. That even though he can't relate to it at all, he recognizes that, yes, the bodies change. And you've no control, really, of exactly how the body's going to change. So he goes back, quite shaken up. He goes out again, and then he sees a sick person. And same thing, what's up with them? Oh, they're sick, and you have a body, you're going to be sick. It's what it is to be human. So that shakes him up. He goes out again. Who does he see? The final one?
Funeral.
The death. The end. Which in India, many parts of the world, you literally see the dead body walking through the streets. It's not like, in a coffin. So lifeless. And he says, that's going to happen to you too. Everything that's born, everything that lives, everything will die. So that he can't go back to his everyday life in the way that he has. He just can't, a bit like my experience coming back from the plane, I couldn't quite settle back in. And either me over this threshold, going back into my life as a Buddhist, I was like, I can't quite settle back in to the life I left because I've seen something different. My perspective has changed. Something bigger, that I've got a bigger question that's opened up. So he goes out for the final time and he sees a wandering, in the hustle and bustle of the streets, he sees this person walking very serenely, like the guy on the stairs, very serenely, and it draws his attention. He's carrying a bowl, an empty bowl. And he says to his attendant, well, who's he? What's he doing? He goes, he's seeking the truth. He's a truth seeker. And that's it. He's like, he knows that's what he's got to do. So he goes on his quest. He leaves everything behind, which is a huge thing. Wife, child, very controversial still, even today. But I think what we probably don't see is that he understood that he didn't have the answer, and the answer was fundamental. It's like if he could find the answer, it would change the way he lived. And not just for himself. And I think he really saw that because no one had the answer. A bit like with me and my friend, like going, can you? And she's like, oh, just don't worry about it. It's like if you find the answer, you share it. If you find a way of being that works, you share it. So that's really, I think, really motivated his quest. So he goes off 6 years of learning from others, being by himself, gathering friends, on the path, wanting to find out. He finally sits down and says, and is ready to break through into truth. And that's his enlightenment experience. So enlightenment as in, there's different ways to talk about enlightenment, but it's the absence of greed, hatred, and ignorance, they say. Also, really what it is like you're entering a different types of consciousness, a different level type, type of consciousness, I would say. You're not in your ordinary mind anymore. The mind that struggles and worries and in the past and the future and, that mind that we all know, the habitual mind. That mind doesn't have a hold anymore. You're in a mind that is loving, that is that's aligned to the truth. And in a way, that's ultimate human fulfillment. Because when I say aligned to the truth, well, one truth is that things change. That's a very basic Buddhist teaching. It's essential, I should say, essential Buddhist teaching. Everything is in a process of change, everything. We can see that. We can step back and go, yeah, that's probably true. My plant does this and I do that. And, that person changed a bit there and this world event has changed. You can see it on all the different levels of experience that there's change, but we don't live like that. That's where the problems then happen. And we also want to fix things. This is the way things should be. Yeah? Like this, like the way I think that. And then, of course, somebody else has got their own version and, it's fixed around that. And if they're warring, if they're countries and leaders, you end up in war. Because both are fixed, or one's very fixed and imposing it on the other. Yeah? Or both. So, in a way, this is a very essential truth that everything is in a process of change. So how do we live with that truth? When you're in this enlightened consciousness, you're aligned to that truth. So you're not working it out, trying to figure it out. You're not pushing it away. You are in flow, with it. You're also, if you're really aligned to that truth, that everything is in a process of change. Well, I'm in a process of change now. You're in a process of change. This whole building, even though it seems so fixed, is in a process of change. Yeah. How did we even come to be? We don't relate to ourselves as, 2 years old, 8 months old. Yeah. We probably can't relate to ourselves as 90 years old. Yeah. But there's a process of change that's been going on. So therefore, what is true? What is true about me? What's true about you? And where do I end and you begin? I've had a child, and it was fascinating for me because I was just like, well, where did he come from? You can work out the mechanics. But really, when he arrived, I was like, oh my, it was just a miracle. And even now, and I look at where he is now, he's completely different from where he was when he was born. And we're very different, me and my son. And we're also so connected. We're not as separate as we think we are. That's the kind of nutshell of this. We're not as separate as we think we are. And that's why I think when we're, being human is like this great opportunity to learn what our own mind is, to learn what ordinary consciousness is, which we're in a lot of the time, most of the time, to learn what it takes to step out of ordinary consciousness, elevate our consciousness, and then see what life is really like. What is human life really like when we're not in the survival, to getting things done? What I know from my own experience is life is a lot bigger. It's a lot more beautiful. It's a lot more mysterious. And the more I'm in that expansive state, the more I feel connected to others. The more I actually see that I'm not separate from others. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm going through the similar experience as you are. In terms of having a body, in terms of trying to work things out, in terms of the way the mind works. When we do the other practice that we do here, the Metta-bhavana practice, which is a practice of loving kindness, when we're cultivating loving kindness for yourself, for a friend, for someone you don't know, someone you don't like, and then all beings everywhere. I love that practice. I love introducing that practice. And often, every now and again, you get somebody in the room goes, well, I love everybody. I don't have anyone to put in that, so I love everyone, And great. Well, also know that there's probably a bit more investigation to happen. Because when we scratch the surface of our ordinary mind, we see the hatred. We see the kind of greed, the craving. We see the kind of, I just don't want to know. Just don't tell me anything. I don't want to know. I just want to get on. We see that ignorance. And when you see it and you experience it, actually, I just think it's a great opportunity. It's not like, oh no, I've got a bit of craving, No, it's like, actually, it's awareness. It's your consciousness is rising at that point. Because you're seeing your ordinary mind. And when you see your ordinary mind, what you're actually doing is stepping back from your experience and having perspective. And then, of course, one of the key things about being human is that we can be aware that we're aware. We don't have to just be in the experience. We can step back and be aware of awareness. And then when you're aware of awareness, another key thing about being human is that you can then choose how to respond to what you experience. You don't just have to just go along with it. Oh, okay. I experienced coming back to my house and going, okay, unpleasant experience, stepping back into the life I created, something unpleasant about it. So I'm going to choose what I do with that. But I could have gone, I could have gone really down on myself and gone, you made some poor choices along the way. I could have definitely done that. But actually, I chose to kind of be into the question, what needs to happen here? So that's a creative response. So we can be aware that we're aware. We can choose our response. We have free will. And then we can create something different. And when we create something different, if you have a vision, like I did with that sky, or like I did when, I'm really inspired. I was very inspired by Martin Luther King. He was my first sort of teacher, if you like, beyond my mother. When I'm inspired, I think, okay, how do I live with that vision? How do I live that I feel united with others? That when I'm upset, I don't push others away and I don't negate myself. What does that look like for me? That's how you change the world. More people do that, the world is different. And I feel more of us need to be able to, be prepared, if you like, to go on that kind of journey. It's an inward journey, but it's an inward journey that actually manifests outwards. It's an inward journey to begin with, where you got to get to know your being, as it were. But then it's a journey that actually takes you out, because you're then seeing, what I go through, others go through. And I am actually deeply connected to others. How does that look? I'm going to end with a quote. I had a few actually, but let me end with... I'm going to end with that. Martin Luther King, since I've mentioned him. And he says, in a sense, all life is interrelated. All men, all people are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And then my teacher says, this is one of the reasons why I'm a Buddhist. This is my teacher, Sangharakshita. He says, I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it's possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly, deeply believe. The belief is part of my own experience. It is part of my own life. It is part of me. I cannot live without this belief. And I would rather die than give it up.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this talk, you are warmly invited to visit Buddhistisches Tor Berlin in Kreuzberg. We offer meditation, Dharma talks, and courses that support practice in everyday life. You'll find more information in the episode description.